Good evening. The June 10th, 2021 meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board is called to order. Would Secretary Ho please take the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Terrosis.
Here.
Commissioner Phyllis.
Here.
Commissioner Foster.
Here.
Vice Chair Duran.
Here.
And Chair Phyllis. Oh, I'm sorry, Chair Sultan.
Double here.
All right. I believe the next item is approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. I have a motion to approve the board's, the minutes of the board's last meeting.
So moved.
I think I definitely heard a motion from, I'm sorry, I definitely, from Commissioner Foster at least. Mr. Ho. Okay, right, we need a second. Secretary Ho, could you take a vote?
Yes. Commissioner Phyllis.
Yes.
Commissioner Foster. Commissioner Terrosis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duran.
Yes.
And Chair Sultan.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to special agenda items. Do we have any, Ms. Condon?
Yes, I have a few announcements this evening. Are you able to see my video or no?
No, I'm
Not
not.
at this moment, no.
Okay, let me turn it off, turn it back on. Don't know why that is. It was fine before we went live, but I'll give you the announcements and then maybe sign off and rejoin. So we have a few announcements this evening. In the last week of this month, we'll be sending our summer mailing about the annual rent increase to all property owners and tenants in controlled rental units. The owner's mailing will include the updated rent control information sheet that owners are required to give to tenants at the time of lease signing. We'll also send a copy of that information sheet to the tenants, as it's a good summary of the major provisions of the law. We'll also be mailing registration fee bills to property owners the last week of June, and they must be paid by August 2nd in order for owners to pass through half of the fee to the tenants. To ensure payments are received on time and to save the price of a stamp, we're encouraging all owners to pay their fees online through a link on our website. This year, to make online payments even easier, the registration fee bill will have a QR code that will provide direct access to the online payment page. I'm happy to announce that we began serving the public in person at the beginning of June. We're doing it by appointments on Tuesday and Thursday, and later this month we'll be expanding that to Monday through Thursday by appointment. And of course, we'll continue to answer questions both by telephone and email, as we've been doing successfully through the public health emergency. On the eviction moratorium, both the local eviction moratorium for reasons other than non-payment of rent and the state eviction moratorium for non-payment of rent due to impacts of COVID-19 are currently set to expire at the end of this month. More information about both of the laws may be obtained by calling our office or by checking our website, where there are links to helpful information. I think later Mr. Augusta will give us hopefully some updated information about the state eviction moratorium. Also, the rental assistance program that I've announced several times in the last several months, that is available to help cover unpaid rent and utility costs for income eligible Santa Monica tenants and property owners who have not received the full rent payments from any of their tenants. They can get information about that through the state's website at housingiskey.com. And I looked at the website today and I see that there's a helpful interactive tool that helps guide both landlords and tenants through some questions that helps them determine their eligibility. We encourage anybody who has been affected and who has either not been able to pay the rent or who has not received the full rent from their tenants to access that site, find out if they're eligible, and if so, to apply. Those are the announcements that I had this evening.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on now, I believe, to jurisdictional items. The first item is an exemption application, 10A, case number 1818, regarding 2337 20th Street.
Anyone want to cite these or entertain that?
I will move to approve both items without a staff report. They were very straightforward and factually speaking, pretty black and white. And so we don't have any public comments. So seeing none, I'll approve. I would move to approve both owner occupancy exemptions this evening and adopt the conclusions of findings of fact and conclusions of law.
I'll second. I would second. No.
Okay, it sounds like we have motion and a second. Can we take a vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Commissioner Torosis?
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duran?
Yes.
And Chair Sultan?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, great. Moving rapidly through our agenda today. Moving on to the public hearings that we have scheduled. The first public hearing item is consideration of imposing a $39 ceiling or maximum increase on the 2021 annual general adjustment of 1.7%. I believe our general counsel is going to give us a staff report on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. Each year when the board announces the annual general adjustment, you also are authorized under the charter to consider imposing a rent ceiling on those adjustments. The board is required to set a public hearing for consideration by the public before deciding whether to impose that hearing. At the board's last meeting on May 13th, the board did indeed set a public hearing for tonight. So that's what you are going to do this evening, is to hear from the public and consider whether to impose a rent ceiling of $39, which is calculated per the formula in the charter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anybody, would anybody like to start discussion or have any questions? Ms. Regan?
I have a question.
All right. Vice Chair Duran.
Are there, I take it there's nobody in queue to speak on this matter?
My understanding is that we don't have anybody who's asked to speak on this.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to check on that before we went into any kind of deliberation. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, let me know if I'm wrong, Secretary Hope, but that's my understanding. Is nobody's asked to speak on this item.
Correct. We had no request to speak, just the written comments.
Great, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Torosis.
Well, I don't have any necessary discussion. I'm prepared to make a motion. I would say that I not only received written correspondence via Mr. Ho, but I also received mail to my home about this item and had received email. And although I'm disappointed that we don't have any public comment today, hopefully by the time we are back together in person, we will have people feeling more comfortable to come speak with us. But I would say that I'm prepared to adopt alternative 2, which would be to adopt resolution 21-002 announcing the general adjustment and imposing the $39 ceiling.
Second.
I realize I'm like coming late to the party. Is there any opportunity, Commissioner Torosis, just to briefly have discussion? Because I think you're right, and I will be super fast on it. I just think like
Sure.
just the decision, right, to impose the cap, I feel like is one that like we often get feedback on year after year, and I think it's important for us to always reflect every year on why we're imposing it and make sure that those reasons are clear to the public. I think, you know, you're the maker of the motion, so I can only intuit what your logic is, but my logic for agreeing with you is that, you know, I think that our rents are rising too quickly, and knowing what market rents start at for housing that's been decontrolled under Costa-Hawkins, I think confirms exactly why we need the cap, because you have such high initial starting rent rates that the adjustments, even with the GA, make many of these initial starting rents quickly unaffordable for tenants, and I think it undermines the purpose of rent control. And I worry about the young people who are moving into these neighborhoods who won't be able to stay. And I want renters to always have a stake in our community and to have a voice in our community, and I think rent control is a really essential part of that. So all for the motion. And obviously, you know, we're coming out of a pandemic. Our economy is uncertain. And I hope that this will allow some renters to stay in their homes, particularly as some of our other renter protections are going to be potentially going away. So thank you for the motion.
Great. I will accept those friendly comments and concur with them, and my motion stands.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Phyllis. Shall we vote on Commissioner Phyllis's motion?
And I believe Commissioner Foster had seconded it, but maybe
and
not.
I believe it was already seconded by Commissioner Foster.
All right, Commissioner Phyllis,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Torosis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duran,
Yes.
and Chair Sultan.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next public hearing on consideration and adoption of the Rent Control Board fiscal year 2021-22 operating budget. Executive Director Condon, please give us a staff report.
All right. Well, I'm very sorry that my video is not working. I've signed out twice and signed back in.
No.
Your video is working. We can see you. I think we thought you meant you were presenting a video.
I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
Oh, I thought you meant you were presenting a video as well.
No. All
Yeah,
right.
we can see you.
Yeah, we can see you.
Everything's
all right.
working. It's
Everything's
great.
working. All right. Very good. All right. Well, tonight the board is scheduled to hold a public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 21-22 budget and then adopt it. The board reviewed the budget and agency goals on May 13th and supported staff's recommendations. Because we covered the budget in detail last month and it's been available on the board's website since May, and we have no requests from the public to speak this evening, I'll provide just a brief summary. For the upcoming fiscal year, we're projecting operating expenditures of $5,505,000 and revenue of $5,284,000, resulting in a projected deficit of approximately $221,000. For the 5th year, the budget is funded by a $198 per unit annual registration fee that will cover the board's reasonable and necessary expenses. Owners who pay the fee on time by August 2nd may pass through half of the fee to the tenants. Despite the projected deficit, we're not recommending increasing the fee this year as the board has sufficient reserves to cover the projected deficit. The budget maintains the current operations of the agency and ensures the provision of the highest level of public service in our day-to-day operation. Although most of our staff members have worked remotely over the past 15 months, as I mentioned before, at the beginning of June, we began providing in-person services by appointment to the public. We're going to expand that to Monday through Thursday by appointment at the end of this month. And we look forward to assisting people in person by appointment and by email and phone as we've been doing over the past 15 months. For the foreseeable future, we will continue to provide mediation and hearing services via video conference and are prepared to address any pent-up demand that may have resulted from reluctance during the pandemic for people to request repairs and maintenance and have service people in their homes. As in the current year, next year's budget contains both operating expenses and additional expenditures, including the continuing capital improvement project to replace the legacy rent database, and a 5th payment on the loan that the board received from the city in 2017 to accelerate paying down the agency's unfunded pension liability. The board previously approved the expenditures for the capital improvement project and the 10-year repayment plan for the PERS loan. As I mentioned, the budget document has been on the agency's website since the May study session, and a cover memo that the board received and is also on the website highlights some specific items, expenditure items. So unless the board would like me to review any of the specific expenditure items or to go over the goals again that we discussed on May 13th, you should open the public hearing and then close the public hearing because unfortunately we don't have anybody who's requested to speak, and then consider a motion to adopt the budget. And once again, I want to thank Lina Noseworthy for her excellent work on preparing the budget and monitoring it. And as you all know, she does a great job of zeroing in on the expenses, and I want to thank her for that.
Thank you,
And
Ms.
that
Condon.
completes the staff report.
Thank you so much, Ms. Condon. It looks like we have a question or comment from Commissioner Trosas. Foster.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that report, and always thank you to staff and to Lima and Dan and everybody for running such a tight ship and for being so gosh darn accurate. We really appreciate that, as do the stakeholders who pay these fees, the landlords and the tenants. So we appreciate that. I was curious, so while I completely understand everything you've said about the deficit spend for this 1 year, and that several years running we have not had to, and nor have you recommended us raising the registration fee, which is great. When the extra expenses for the database project go away, and some of these other, like we didn't have to do a, there was a deferred plan payment for fiscal year 21-22. Do those offset each other when they go away and come back? And I mean, how do you see those two particular line items affecting future budgets?
Well, when the board approved the capital improvement project, we encumbered money for that project. So that money is all allocated to the capital improvement project. You're correct that the city council chose to defer or extend a payment plan, which is another acceleration of payment towards PERS for the unfunded liability. Those costs will resume next year. And so no, the database project will not offset those costs because that cost is separate, the database project. The next payment towards the unfunded pension liability will increase the board's budget and expenditures. And although we don't need to increase the fee this year, I can't say for sure, but this is not an uncommon pattern that we have where we increase the fee and we're able to work at that fee for a certain number of years. And as I said, this is the 5th year at $198 per unit. But at some time, we will have to increase it because costs are increasing. So that could be
very good run. I have a quick, thank you for answering that. I have a quick question about the legal expenses. So in years past, we've always had a higher, and you acknowledge it in the staff report, we've always had a higher allocation for that. Are you saying that because outstanding suits were wrapped up and we don't have as much activity, that's why staff felt comfortable for the first time in a long time reducing this budget?
Well, that's part of it. And also you see that we set that money as we allocate that money for legal expenses. And then if we don't have to pay them, that helps offset other costs in the budget. And last year, you know, we did not have to expend a large percentage of the allocation we had made for legal expenses. But I do want to mention that we do have a designated reserve for legal expenses of about $45,000. So if we had legal expenses that exceed what we've allocated this year, we could come to you and ask the board to open that reserve, put it into the current year's budget, and that would help us cover an additional $45,000 in legal fees or expenses.
Great. Those are my questions. Thank you so much.
All right, so then open the public hearing and close it and consider a motion.
Okay. Sounds like since no. Oh wait, did you want to say something else, Commissioner Foster?
I was going to move that we adopt the budget for fiscal year 21-22.
So we have to have the public comment open and closed, right? I mean, it sounds like it's just a formality.
Since we have no members of the public here, unfortunately, to comment on the budget, it's time to close the public hearing. Is there anything else we need to do to officially close it besides say it's closed?
That's it.
So the public hearing is closed, and we had a motion from Commissioner Foster, right? Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second. Or Commissioner Foster.
I heard Commissioner.
Phyllis.
Okay, Commissioner Phyllis seconded the motion to adopt the budget. Let's take a vote, please.
Sure. Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Commissioner Torosis.
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis.
Yes.
Vice Chair Duran.
Yes.
And Chair Sultan.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our administrative item, which is a report from our legislative advocate, Brian Augusta. He's going to present on the 21-22 regular session of the California Legislature. There you are, Mr. Augusta. Welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity to update you and the public on our work in the Capitol and give you updates on what's happening legislatively on issues of interest to the board. So here we are, June 10th, and it's kind of one of those moments in the legislative session where it's a little bit the eye before the storm. We've gotten past first House deadline. We've gotten past the May revise. That is the governor's May revise to the budget, his revised proposal that came out in May. And we're now heading towards the budget deadline. And we are also heading towards very important and very critical deadline, which is June 30th, when the protections in AB 3088 and SB 91 would expire absent additional action by the legislature. So in that atmosphere, sort of between deadlines in terms of policy bills and a real sort of growing urgency around both the budget and the eviction protections. I wish I was here to tell you something very definitive about what is happening on any of that, but I unfortunately, like I'm confident is true for anyone other than perhaps those in the most inner circles, don't have a lot of solid, definitive answers for you about where we're going. But I can lay out for you a few of those things. So tonight I wanted to just talk about those two big items, both the budget and the extension of 3088 and SB 91. Let me just start with the budget because in some ways it's driving a lot of this. Number one, the state has an unprecedented surplus, and many tenant advocates and affordable housing advocates are hopeful that that surplus plus the additional federal money that we have seen as part of 2 stimulus packages will be used to alleviate the housing crisis in California and help alleviate the crisis for renters and homeowners who are facing the potential for eviction or foreclosure as a result of our economic downturn. And there certainly is a lot of money to spend in that regard. In May, the governor released his budget and had a fairly ambitious set of proposals around housing that included several $1 billion to expand his program on housing and homelessness, the Home Key program, focused on acquiring properties and repurposing them for the goal of housing those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. He also is focusing on putting some dollars into rehab and acquisition as well of affordable housing, and putting some money into funding for expanded legal services for indigent tenants who are in need of legal assistance. Fast forward to last week, the legislature released its joint budget. That joint budget differs in several key ways from the governor's, but also aligns with it in several ways. They too endorsed the governor's plan to put about $1.75 billion towards affordable housing projects that have received some amount of funding from the State Department of Housing, but have not yet received state tax credits or other funding that they're looking for. So that would relieve a pretty significant backlog of hundreds of projects, 400 projects that could help produce thousands of units in California. There's also in that a fairly strong commitment to expanded legal aid. The May revision had about $60 million in funding. The legislature's plan is for about double that. That will go to a variety of uses, but including expanding funding for eviction defense and for counseling and education for tenants. There is also additional resources planned, as I said, for affordable housing and for local planning around housing. So between the legislature and the governor, $500 million to $750 million is proposed to support local planning efforts to expand, to comply with state housing law and expand availability of support planning for additional housing. Having said all of that, we don't have a budget deal. Today's the 10th. September 5th or June 15th is the deadline for the legislature under a voter initiative that was passed a number of years ago. The legislature must enact budget by June 15th or they lose their pay as legislators. In recent years, it's become evident that that mandate to the legislature is a bit hollow in that all it requires is that the legislature enact the budget. It doesn't require that the governor sign it. So last night at 1 a.m., the legislature put into print a version of the budget. It's largely the version that the legislature said is their plan. And they did so because of an additional voter initiative, which requires that any legislation be in print for at least 72 hours before it is enacted by both houses. And so to meet the 15th deadline, they have put that in print. Now, they actually have a few more hours, days really, to get something else in print if that were to happen. But right now, the bill that is in print, that is a budget bill, they would act on the 15th, does not, to our knowledge, represent a deal with the governor. It is instead a version of the budget that could pass, and this is something that the legislature has done in years past. Pass a budget, and then either that budget is vetoed or could conceivably be rescinded, the vote rescinded. But regardless, a subsequent bill is passed that adds additional detail to that budget, what they call a budget junior. There are trailer bills that spell out the details that follow on long after the June 15th deadline. And that's what most folks who are watching are saying is likely going to happen, that by the 15th, absent some detail over the next 48 hours, the legislature will act on what they think is a reasonable budget, send it to the governor, and then we will all be watching to see what happens between June 15th, June 30th, when the end of the current fiscal year, and by which ideally the legislature and the governor will have agreed on a deal and enacted a new budget for the new fiscal year. So what does all of that mean for the issues that the board cares about? Well, obviously there's a lot of affordable housing money wrapped up in that, and there's some differences between the governor and then the legislature on that, and we expect that behind the scenes there's additional negotiation going on that. There's also a lot of detail that is not yet available about how exactly that money would be spent, the legal services money, preservation money. That will all be evident once trailer bill language is made available publicly, is published, and most of that has not yet been published. And that, the trailer bill language, as I said, can happen long after June 15th, anytime really between now and when the legislature goes into recess in the middle of September. So this process will be ongoing. But I think for those who are watching at home, as the legislature goes through this process, what we're all watching for is an announcement that the legislature, the big three, the legislature and the governor, have a budget deal. And as of yet, we have not received sort of that indication that there is a budget deal. So that could still happen over the next couple of days. It could happen after the June 15th deadline. But there is no doubt a lot hanging in the balance on that question. So we will be watching that closely. And we expect we'll hear more details in the days to come. But the other thing, which is related, unrelated, is the future of the eviction protections and the rollout of the rental housing program, the emergency rental assistance program that was designed in SB 91 to deploy the billions of dollars that have come from the federal government to provide rent relief to landlords and tenants. Now, on the rent relief program, as you all are probably aware, the rollout of that program has been very slow. And not surprisingly, we as a state are standing up a brand new program intended to deploy billions of dollars to landlords and tenants that has certain restrictions. For example, not all tenants are eligible. Not all rent debt is eligible. There are certain agreements that or requirements that have to be met, and so it's taken a while to stand that up. At the same time, many people have pointed out the application process for those funds is extremely cumbersome. Somebody was observing to me the other day that the application that a tenant must fill out just to confirm that their landlord is eligible for the funding is 36 pages long. So it's not surprising that social media today, I saw a post from a reporter that the State Department of Housing had revealed that only about 2% of the dollars have gone out from applications that have been submitted. So this on 20 days before the June 30th deadline, for at which time the eviction protections that have been in place since last summer will come to an end. And so for everyone involved, landlords and tenants, that June 30th deadline is feeling more and more like a looming deadline, a looming cliff. From the standpoint of landlords who possibly have not received rental payments in some amount of time, they're very keen on the state getting the money out. And we have heard from landlord groups that they too are frustrated at the pace. Tenants, obviously, not only does the delay in deploying the rental assistance pose a huge risk, but come June 30th, without that relief, the rules are back to what they were before the pandemic. So while tenants have been protected by a rule that basically says you owe no more than 25% of the rent, and essentially that rent, if you meet certain circumstances, is not due until the end of June, all of a sudden that bill will come due. And if the rental payments are not made available to satisfy that back rent, we could see a fairly significant wave of evictions. So from our conversations in the Capitol, everyone recognizes that that is a result that would be catastrophic. But there is not, before the legislature, a bill yet to extend those protections. And as was the case with SB 91, where most of the details did not emerge until the final moments before it was voted on, we're in that same boat. We collectively are in that same boat, that there is not a bill moving through the legislature that spells out what the plan is, but presumably there are conversations going on behind the scenes that that will result in something going into print on June 30th. One of the big things that has changed since the last time I was here to speak with you about that is that the governor announced just prior to releasing his May revise of the budget that he would be expanding the rental assistance program to change the way in which the money is allocated. Now, under the current program, prospective rent payments are only equal to 25% of the rent, basically enough to satisfy the protections in 3088 and ensure that a tenant gets enough money to avoid eviction under 3088. And for rental arrears, the money would only be 80% of what was owed, with the idea being that the other 20% would be waived. Newsom announced that, consistent with new, looser rules under the more recent money that was released from the Biden administration, that they would go to 100% and that the tenant could apply directly as opposed to applying through his or her landlord. Notwithstanding that announcement a month or so ago, no, we have not seen that change, which would require a statutory change. That has not yet been enacted. There have been some recent, as of the last couple of days, improvements in the application process to simplify it. But still, we have these numbers that demonstrate both the state administered program and many of the local programs, the money is very slow to get out the door. So all of that is weighing certainly on those who are advocating for the interests of tenants and of landlords to get this money out and to resolve the question before we get to that eviction cliff. But the looming question is, will we extend the eviction protections? And will we put reforms in place that will make sure that those dollars get out in time? Now, I could say that tenant advocates have been pushing the message that we need to enact the 100% payment standard. We need to protect people from the potential that this looming debt will haunt them for years to come. But most importantly, we also need to extend those eviction protections. And I believe that the leadership of all three, the big three, sees the need to extend those protections. We certainly cannot, at this point, presumably, everyone understands that we cannot allow those eviction protections to evaporate while people are still waiting to hear what the new rules will be. So I'm confident, although I have no additional information than any other member of the public or you, that there will be a push to extend those eviction protections, that we will see something in the days to come that provides some relief. And I'm told that the governor made a public statement today indicating that he supports extension of those protections. So we seem to be trending in the right direction there, but there's a lot of work to be done to put all these pieces in place before June 30th. And right now, we're not seeing a lot of details, but we hope to hear and see those details in the weeks to come. I will just close this item by noting that there are obviously a lot of things wrapped up in this. The budget presents a lot of opportunity, but as a result, it also presents a lot of avenue for the three parties to negotiate. So basically a three-way game of chess, negotiating over how this surplus should be spent and what's the wisest investments. And it is inescapable that the eviction protections, which end roughly at the same time that the new budget starts, are going to get wrapped up in that conversation as well. So we hope that over the next few days, if not the next couple of weeks, we must see some additional details and some action by the legislature on this. So we're hopeful that is obviously the case in the days to come. I think that's the big story. There are some bills this year that I know are of interest to the board. A number of them are bills that we had highlighted previously for the board, which have now become two-year bills. There's an Ellis Act reform bill. There's a bill about about a statewide rental registry. Both of those have hit pause. There continues to be in Sacramento a conversation about housing production as a tool for reducing housing costs, and the Senate has a package of bills which are listed in the report that I provided, that detail what some of those proposals are, lot splits and ADUs and increasing density on smaller single-family parcels. But I think for now, at least, and I'm certainly, once I stop talking, we'll take any questions you may have about those individual bills. But I think the big story is the budget and the eviction protections, and that's what I wanted to focus my remarks on tonight. So why don't I pause there, Madam Chair and members, and see if you have any questions or comments on what I've presented so far.
Thank you, Mr. Augusta. I see that Commissioner Foster would like to speak.
Yeah, so, Foster, you mean Terosis? Wait, what?
Oh, wait, no, Foster really did want to speak.
Oh, okay, fine, I'll go after her. Go ahead, Anastasia.
Whichever, doesn't matter. I know we're like interchangeable. It would seem tonight. So talk to me, please, about AB 854, Lee, the Ellis Act, and AB 1188, Wicks, the rental housing data collection. I just feel like those two are so hugely important, and they didn't get a lot of press. And I didn't really hear much about how they made their way through the first committee, first subcommittee or the first hearings they had. And even though it says 2-year bill, what do you think?
So on 854, let me take that one up first. This is a policy that's been tried in the past. The details are maybe slightly different, but the idea on 854, Mr. Leno from San Francisco did this bill a few times, and perhaps Amiano before him, to establish a holding period under the Ellis Act. The idea being that the Ellis Act was originally enacted as a way for a property owner to exit the rental housing market. So if they're in the rental housing business and feel that a local rent control policy constrains their ability to exit the business, this gives them the opportunity to do that. That's a much different character than a investor who buys a piece of property knowing the existence of the local rent control policy and then immediately uses the Ellis Act to remove that property from the rental housing stock and escape the local rent control and presumably demolish it and use it for some other purpose. Although, as we have seen with Ellis activity, particularly in the LA region, but also in San Francisco, that sometimes even the Ellis provisions Ellis is used even when the landlord intends to actually stay in the business, but is used to escape some of those protections. So there's a lot of pressure to reform that, to ensure that Ellis is really being used for its intended purpose, which is someone who legitimately wants to change their business model and no longer be in the rental housing business. And that's not an investor buying an ongoing existing rental property and then immediately Ellising it. So this would have a holding period that would require that the owner own it for some amount of time before they can access Ellis. It did not get a hearing in the Assembly Housing Committee. It was not taken up for a hearing. So it's now a 2-year bill, which would mean it'd have to get out of the Assembly Housing Committee and off the floor of the Assembly starting in January when they resume. So they basically have a month to do what would have been several months of activity. So I want to say that that has great prospects, but I think given that timing, it's going to be very tough. So the furthest this policy has gotten before was off the Senate floor when it was a district-only bill, a San Francisco-only bill, and it got to the Assembly Housing Committee and met the same fate. So that's sort of my assessment of where that's going. Now, AB 1188 has been introduced a couple of times by Assemblymember Wicks to create some form of statewide rental registry, the idea being not just in cities like Santa Monica where we register rents of controlled units, but to register the rents of all units statewide. It's obviously a very ambitious idea, and there's obviously going to be some pretty significant costs associated with that. So we have been watching that very closely on your behalf because the Rent Board has a lot of experience with what works and what doesn't in countries, and we've had some conversations with the author's office about that, but that bill ultimately got held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee on the suspense file, not surprisingly, given the potential state costs. I'm quite confident that Assemblymember Wicks will be back next year with similar measure and her sponsors as the conversation continues around how do we track the trends on rents. So that's two very long answers to your question, but I hope that gave you the info you're looking for.
Thank you.
Mr. Trosas?
Thank you, Mr. Augusta. Appreciate it as always. And I know that there was a bill cap on members this year, so although we still did see a lot of bills move forward, I think getting this budget thing right and the rent relief right is really, really important. I would just say before I ask something of you, I was speaking earlier with my colleagues. I've started to have folks who are contacting me who are already receiving eviction notices. And I think that, this is just the canary in the coal mine, I think, of what we're about to see. And I'm very, very concerned. I would also ask, I know that there have been significant issues with the rollout of SB 91 in the rent relief program, to your point, Mr. Augusta, and I understand that there is a letter circulating amongst the cities to sign on to ask the governor and our legislature to extend the eviction moratorium while we figure this out and get this money out. And I know we're just the rent control board and not the city, but I would implore us, is it possible that we can sign on to such a letter? I don't know, but I would like to explore to see if that's a possibility. I also said earlier, just for everyone who's listening, I happen to know this because, again, I work at the county, and so we used a significant amount of CARES Act funding on rent relief before we were to receive any money from the state or the feds for this express purpose, and we were able to get about $70 million of CARES Act rent relief funding out in about 2 months, and by comparison, with the state program, we've got about $2 million of rent relief out in 2 months, and there are tons of tenants out there who need it, and I think the program is flawed. The fact that we are asking landlords to opt in, well, obviously, if we have long-term tenants who are paying well below market, why would a landlord opt in if their tenant is unable to pay them? They will want their tenant to leave. So I'm very concerned about the state program in any event, but I think we need to extend the eviction moratorium while we figure this out. And so I would just, I don't know, Tracy or Brian, who the right person to ask this of is, but can we sign on to anything? Would it be helpful, Brian? Maybe not, but you're our advocate. You tell us what can we do affirmatively speaking here.
Procedurally, I'll refer to your counsel and executive director on the question of if, but certainly I think local governments who have a distinct interest in making sure that we don't turn the eviction machine back on while we're still trying to get money out to constituents have a very important role to play in that conversation. And I know of the letter that you're speaking of, and it would make sense for every elected entity to sign on to that if that is their choice. So I would defer to Condon about whether you can. I would say that the timing is short, so it would be shortly.
I don't want to say like, oh, let's send a resolution to city council and wait to hear from them like that. We don't have time for that. Maybe Allison can tell us what she thinks.
Sure. I mean, we would have to put it on the agenda. So to the extent there's no time for that, I would suggest that if each of you make your comments known to Mr. Augusta, and that's certainly on the record, that each of you support these actions, and then Mr. Augusta will take those comments back with them. And then if it's still helpful, we can certainly put that on the next agenda to have a resolution at the July meeting.
What is our deadline, Carolyn, do we know what our deadline would be for this?
Isn't this being like imminently decided? I mean, not July's too late for sure, but I'm
just wondering whether there would be the opportunity for like a special meeting if we did want to do it as a body.
And also, like, is there any sort of like urgency? I can't remember, Ms. Regan, in the Brown Act, if this is like a matter of urgency, which is why, again, friends and commissioners, I asked for a legislative agenda so that we could quickly sign on to things to not have to agendize these and wait the next month. But in any event,
I think having an extra meeting is a fantastic idea, especially since they're over Blue Jeans. It's not that big of an imposition. We could give the public the minimum amount of notice required and quickly do this during this next week, couldn't we?
Well, Brian, you tell us, is it even helpful? I mean, the other question is like, can Tracy in the back here tell city council to sign? Like, would it be better if our city council signed on to this, Brian? Oh, we have a cat. No, I love it. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Tracy, did you want to address that?
You're on mute, Tracy.
Sorry about that. I think the city council would have the same timing issue that you have. They do have a special meeting next week, which the agenda was posted today. I could talk with the city manager tomorrow about whether they could add that to their agenda, or you could speak with one of the council members or mayor if you wanted to. What about what Ms. Regan said, Mr. Augusta, about you expressing what the board's sentiment is about this?
Yes, I think that would be equally effective.
Wait, but Brian, can you put all of our names on it? Like, I want my name on it. He's like, no.
I mean, that's not a question for me as much as maybe Condon or Ms. Regan about whether or not individual members could sign in their individual capacities.
I was going to say, couldn't we just each send a letter as well, at the minimum?
Right, but then certainly Mr. Augusta could also say that each commissioner at the meeting expressed their support for these
Hold on. So I'm just trying to figure out how we get around this. So if we're on administrative items and he's presenting a report, like, should we change the, like, if we ever want to direct our advocate to do anything and he comes to the board, like, now we're saying that we can't direct him in any, I mean, can we direct counsel to direct our advocate to sign on to this letter? I don't know.
I think you've already directed your advocate to indicate your support for these actions. Am I breaking up here? As far as if you wanted to do a resolution, that would take another meeting. But what I hear from Mr. Augusta is that it's equally effective for him to communicate what you've expressed here tonight.
I feel like it. And look, I'm not a lobbyist. I don't work in this profession, but I can tell you, I feel like it would be more potent to vote as a body. I think that I can recall situations in which different council members took a particular non-official action, and that doesn't carry quite the same clout as an official resolution or position of a body. So if we're going to do it, I think we should do it as a body. If we're not going to do it, then we miss the boat and we know better next year. But I would hope that we do it as a body.
Well, I also would say that we should all contact Mayor Himmelrich right now and get that on a city council meeting, because I hope that they're tracking this, but I don't know if they are. And I would think that the city of Santa Monica might be slightly more influential than the Santa Monica Rent Control Board, although I tend to think that we're, just a bastion of information for the rest of the state.
I think we are a treasure trove of resources, institutional knowledge. I feel like we have a cachet. I would like to do it as a body. I mean, it would be lovely if the city of Santa Monica joined us. Probably would put some pressure on them.
I mean, Ms. Condon, sorry, this is going to create more work, but is it possible, that we could notice something on Monday or something like that and just do a quick, 15-minute on-off at, 7 o'clock?
It's
Costs, wouldn't it, with City TV and everything?
No, let's not go. Do we need to go on City TV or any of that stuff? I'll waive. I don't need to get
live, and City TV has to broadcast everything we do.
Ms. Regan, what are the timing requirements under the Brown Act to call a special meeting and post?
72? Isn't it 72?
Yeah, I thought so. I'll have to look that up just to make sure, but we'll have to follow those requirements, and as well as all of the regular public meeting requirements so that the public can participate if they want.
But Brian, is it dumb to even do this because by Monday this will be resolved?
I don't think that, I would like to think that by Monday we'll have an answer, but that's not certain that much. I think.
Okay.
We can also cancel the meeting. If I would rather set the meeting, and if it gets mooted, it gets mooted, but at least we tried.
We probably should do Tuesday just to be safe, right? Do you guys are you on tomorrow? Are you on or off tomorrow?
Yes, it's a work day tomorrow.
Okay, so can we do Tuesday maybe? Just Tuesday at 7? Is everyone available for 10 minutes?
Yeah. I can do it through Blue Jeans.
There's also a city council meeting on Tuesday night.
But sometimes we have overlapping meetings. That doesn't mean that we can't simultaneously have a meeting.
Right.
I'm almost positive that's happened with other bodies too.
Yeah, they did with the Planning Commission. They had overlapping meetings a week or so ago. We wouldn't have to do it at 7 p.m. We could do it at another time if the board wanted to.
Yeah, true. I could do that.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question through you? When would we need to notice? When would you need to notice this by? Because perhaps what would make sense also is for me to work with Ms. Condon to figure out what is the timing of this letter that other public entities are working on, because it may have already been sent by the time your meeting happens, regardless of the timing of the legislature.
We always join after the fact, right? Like, there's no reason, even if there are like additional signatories, and I've seen that happen.
Well,
Would it be possible to have our meeting before the council meeting, even that same day, so that if we get this resolution, I know it, the Brown Act, they wouldn't be able to talk about it, but they could at least speak to it, that they have received something from us as a body, confirming it could be a part of a public comment or something, and for what that might be worth.
Well, Steve, what we could do, right, would be, we have our own resolution stating our position publicly, right, in support of the bill, so we don't need the city to do anything, and then we tell the city we're noticing this as a special meeting. If you want to add it to your agenda, and then put the ball in their court as to whether they want to take it up.
So I think we would have to notice a public meeting tomorrow, potentially for Tuesday night. So we'd have to do the notice. Brian, if you can give me a little bit more information about this letter, I'll talk with the city manager about it tomorrow and see if they're and as Commissioner Trosa said, you all can contact any of the council members or the mayor and tell them that you're interested in this. And I'll do the same if you give me more information, Brian. I'll contact the city manager and see if they will put it on their agenda. But we could, I think Allison's probably checking, but I think we'd have to notice a meeting tomorrow for Monday or Tuesday, and probably Tuesday would make more sense.
Yeah.
Unless,
I will follow up first thing in the morning.
all right.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, that's great.
I would also just urge everyone from the public, all 2 people who are watching, to call their representatives. And apparently, Assemblymember Gabriel is a tipping point here, as well as anyone that in leadership, just to express that we would like the eviction moratorium extended until the money is expended. Because why start evicting people when we have back rent that could be paid? Anyway, sorry, I'm done now. Thank you, Mr. Augusta, and I apologize if I caused complication here, but this is very important to me. Thanks.
This is why I'm here.
Just for the board's information, a special meeting requires 24 hours notice, and since you're in a meeting now, state the time and the place of the meeting and the purpose of the meeting while you're here. And then we'll make the official notice tomorrow, probably. But I would ask the chair to entertain a motion to do that, and then have a second, and then a vote.
Okay. Could we potentially schedule? It sounds like we only need 24 hours notice. Could we do this on Monday instead of Tuesday?
It's Flag Day, but I don't think that's prohibitive.
Okay. Would somebody like to make a motion to have this special meeting on Monday?
I move that we convene a special meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board for Monday, June 13th. Is that
14th.
Okay? A special meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Monday, June 14th. At is 6 o'clock okay, you guys, instead of 7? At 6 p.m. For the emergent purpose of signing on to a letter that is being circulated to extend the state's eviction moratorium until such time that we get the SB 91 formed rent relief program under, I don't know, a more expedient dissemination of funding. So that's my motion.
Thank you.
Did we second that, Ms. Regan?
I I didn't hear a second. Was there?
I didn't hear a second either.
Second.
I'll second it.
Second from Commissioner Phyllis.
Okay.
Got it.
So Monday at 6. We are noticing a special meeting of the Rent Control Monday at 6, at June 14th, Monday at 6.
I think we have to vote, right?
Yeah. Yes. We need a roll call vote.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please, Secretary.
Sure. Commissioner Torosis,
Yes.
Commissioner Phyllis,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duran,
Yes.
and Chair Sultan.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Hey, great.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Oh wait, Brian, can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
Sorry, I know you're about to leave. It was about adding housing status as a protected category under FEHA. And I see that it's written down here as a 2-year bill as well. Does that mean it's potentially going to be considered in January and doesn't have a great chance to pass right away?
Yeah, yes. I mean, certainly not the bill with that number, but would be something that's an ongoing conversation around policy on that front. And if it's not that bill, probably another bill. But when you have a bill that's a 2-year bill that's still in its first house, it's a lot harder to pass it in the second year.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that would be really helpful too. There's a lot of folks that don't have a rental history.
Absolutely.
Difficulty renting up. Or at least.
You're talking about AB 1000?
Yeah, I'm on AB 1000.
Yeah. So I suspect if that bill in its current form, again, with that number doesn't move forward, Assemblymember Ward is committed to that policy, and I suspect we'll see more on that.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. This has been very informative. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we are ready to adjourn, unless I am neglecting an item. So let's see.
I'm moving it up.
Oh, wait. So I'm supposed to apparently mention the date of the next scheduled rent board meeting. I guess we have an emergency meeting this coming Monday, June 14th at 6 p.m. And the next regularly scheduled rent board meeting is July 8th, 2021, potentially in person, which will be exciting. Maybe we'll have more public participation. And yes, okay, so I heard a motion from Commissioner Foster to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, I think I heard Commissioner Duran there. So we've got a second from Commissioner Duran.
That time, Steve.
And let's take a roll call, unless our general counsel who just reappeared has a comment. No, just reappeared.
No, that was the
Okay. All right. Yes, let's take a roll call. Commissioner Ho, please.
Yes. Commissioner Phyllis,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster,
Yes.
Commissioner Torosis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duran,
Yes.
and Chair Sultan.
Yes.
Motion carries. Have a good night, everyone.
Night, night.
Night.
Thank you. For coming.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.